And now we start the next chapter with a letter written by Carrot to his father. Dearest father, wrote Carrot. Well, here I am in Ankh-Morpork. It is not like at home. I think it must have changed a bit since Mr. Vaneshi's great-grandfather was here. I don't think people here know right from wrong. I found Captain Vimes, oh, here's a captain, in a common alehouse. I remembered what you said about a good dwarf not going into such places, but since he did not come out, I went in. He was lying with his head on the table. When I spoke to him, he said, "Pull the other one, kid. It has got belts. It has got belts on." I believe he was the worse for drink. He told me to find a place to stay and report to Sergeant Colin at the watch house tonight. He said anyone wanting to join the guard needed their head examined. Mr. Vaneshi did not mention this. Perhaps it is done for reasons of hygiene. I went for a walk. There are many people here. I found a place. It is called the Shades. Then I saw some men trying to rob a young lady. I set about them. They did not know how to fight properly, and one of them tried to kick me in the vitals, but I was wearing the protective as instructed, and he hurt himself. Then the lady came up to me and said, was I interested in bed? I said yes. She took me to where she lived, a boarding house, I think it's called. It is run by a Mrs. Palm. The lady whose purse it was, she is called Reed, said, you should have seen them. There were 3 of them. It was amazing. Mrs. Palm said, it is on the house. She said, what a big protective. So I went upstairs and fell asleep, although it is a very noisy place. Reed woke me up once or twice to say, do you want anything? But they had no apples. So I have fallen on my feet, as they say here, but I don't see how that is possible because if you fall off your feet. It is common sense. There's certainly a lot to do. When I went to see the sergeant, I saw a place called the Thieves Guild. I asked Mrs. Palm, and she said, of course. She said the leaders of the thieves in the city meet there. I went to the watch house and met Sergeant Colin, a very fat man, and when I told him about the Thieves Guild, he said, don't be an idiot. I do not think he is serious. He says, don't worry about the Thieves Guilds. This is all what you have to do. You walk along the streets at night, shouting, it's 12 o'clock and all's well. I said, what if it is not all well? And he said, you bloody well find another street. This is not leadership. I have been given some chainmail. It is rusty and not well made. They give you money for being a guard. It is $20 a month. When I get it, I will send you it. I hope you are all well and that shaft number 5 is now open. This afternoon, I will go and look at the Thieves Guild. It is disgraceful. If I do something about it, it will be a feather in my cap. I am getting the hang of how they talk here already. Your loving son, Carrot. P.S. Please give all my love to Minty. I really miss her. Lord Veterinary, the patrician of Ankh-Morpork, put his hand over his eyes. He did what? I was marched through the streets, said Udo van Pew, currently president of the Guild of Thieves, Burglars and Allied Trades. In broad daylight, with my hands tied together. He took a few steps towards the patrician's severe chair of office, waving a finger. You know very well that we have kept within the budget, he said. To be humiliated like that, like a common criminal, there had better be a full apology, he said. Or you will have another strike on your hands. We will be driven to it, despite our natural civic responsibilities, he added. It was the finger. The finger was a mistake. The patrician was staring coldly at the finger. Van Pew followed his gaze and quickly lowered the digit. The patrician was not a man you shook a finger at unless you wanted to end up being able to count only to 9. And you say this was one person, said Lord Veterinary. Yes, that is. Van Pew hesitated. It did sound weird, now he came to tell someone. But there are hundreds of you in there, said the patrician calmly. Thick as, you should excuse the expression, thieves. Van Pew opened and shut his mouth a few times. The honest answer would have been yes, and if anyone had come sidling in and skulking around the corridors, it would have been the worse for them. It was the way he strode in, as if he owned the place, that fooled everyone. That and the fact that he kept hitting people and telling them to mend their ways. The patrician nodded. I shall deal with the matter momentarily, he said. It was a good word. It always made people hesitate. They were never quite sure whether he meant he'd deal with it now or just deal with it briefly. And no one ever dared ask. Van Pew backed down. A full apology, mark you. I have a position to maintain, he added. Thank you. Do not let me detain you, said the patrician, once again giving the language his own individual spin. Right. Good. Thank you. Very well, said the thief. After all, you have such a lot of work to do, Lord Veterinary went on. Well, of course, this is the case. The thief hesitated. The patrician's last remark had barbs on it. You found yourself waiting for him to strike. He said, hoping for a clue. With so much business being conducted, that is. Panic took over the thief's features. Randomized guilt flooded his mind. It wasn't a case of what he had done, it was a question of what the patrician had found out about. The man had eyes everywhere, none of them so terrifying as the icy blue ones just above his nose. I don't quite follow, he began. Curious choice of targets, the patrician picked up a sheet of paper. For example, a crystal ball belonging to a fortune teller in Shear Street, a small ornament from the temple of Offler to the crocodile god, and so on. Googers. I'm afraid I really don't know, said the head thief. The patrician leaned forward. No, unlicensed thievery? Surely, he said. Annotation 6. One of the remarkable innovations introduced by the patrician was to make the Thieves' Guild responsible for theft, with annual budgets, forward planning, and, above all, rigid job protection. Thus, in return for an agreed average level of crime per annum, the thieves themselves saw to it that unauthorized crime was wet with the full force of injustice, which was generally a stick with nails on it. I shall look into it directly, stuttered the head thief. Depend upon it. The patrician gave him a sweet smile. I'm sure I can, he said. Thank you for coming to see me. Don't hesitate to leave. The thief shuffled out. It was always like this with the patrician, he reflected bitterly. You came to him with a perfectly reasonable complaint. Next thing you knew, you were shuffling out backwards, bowing and scraping, relieved simply to be getting away. You had to hand it to the patrician, he admitted grudgingly. If you didn't, he sent men to come and take it away. When he'd gone, Lord Veterinary rang the little bronze bell that summoned his secretary. The man's name, despite his handwriting, was Lupine Once. He appeared pen poised. You could say this about Lupine Once. He was neat. He always gave the impression of just being completed. Even his hair was so smoothed down and oiled, it looked as though it had been painted on. The watch appears to be having some difficulty with the Thieves' Guild, said the patrician. Van Pew has been in here claiming that a member of the watch arrested him. For what, sir? Being a thief, apparently. A member of the watch, said the secretary. I know, But just sort it out, will you? The patrician smiled to himself. It was always hard to fathom Lord Veterinary's idiosyncratic sense of humor, but a vision of the red-faced, irate head thief kept coming back to him. One of the patrician's greatest contributions to the reliable operation of Ankh-Morpork had been, very early in his administration, the legalizing of the ancient Guild of Thieves. Crime was always with us, he reasoned, and therefore, if you were going to have crime, it at least should be organized crime. And so the guild had been encouraged to come out of the shadows and build a big guild house, take their place at civic banquet. I can never pronounce this word. Take their place at civic banquets and set up the training college. Now I got. I'll try that one again. And so the guild had been encouraged to come out of the shadows and build a big guild house, take their place at civic banquets, and set up their training college with day release courses and City of Guilds certificates and everything. In exchange for the winding down of the watch, they agreed, while trying to keep the faces straight to keep crime levels to a level to be determined annually. That way, everyone could plan ahead, said Lord Veterinary, and part of the uncertainty had been removed from the chaos that is life. And then, a little while later, the patrician summoned the leading thieves again and said, "Oh, by the way, there's something else. What was it now? Oh, yes. I know who you are," he said. "I know where you live. I know what kind of horse you ride. I know where your wife has her hair done. I know where your lovely children, how old are they now? My, doesn't time fly? I know where they play. So you won't forget about what we agreed, will you?" And he smiled. So did they, after a fashion. And in fact, it had turned out very satisfactorily from everyone's point of view. It took the head thieves a very little time to grow paunches and start having coat of arms made and meet in a proper building rather than smoky dens, which no one had liked very much. A complicated arrangement of receipts and vouchers saw to it that while everyone was eligible for the attention of the guild, no one had too much, and this was very acceptable, at least to those citizens who were rich enough to afford the quite reasonable premiums the guild charged for an uninterrupted life. There was a strange foreign word for this. Insurance. No one knew exactly what it had originally meant, but Ankh-Morpork had made it its own. The watch hadn't liked it, but the plain fact was that the thieves were far better at controlling crime than the watch had ever been. After all, the watch had to work twice as hard to cut crimes just a little, whereas all the guild had to do was to work less. And so the city prospered, while the watch had dwindled away like a useless appendix into a handful of unemployables who no one in their right mind could ever take seriously. The last thing anyone wanted them to do was get it into their heads to fight crime. But seeing the head thief discommoded was always worth the trouble, the patrician felt. Captain Vimes knocked very hesitantly at the door because each tap echoed around his skull. "Enter!" Vimes removed his helmet, tucked it under his arm, and pushed the door open. Its creak was a blunt saw across the front of his brain. He always felt uneasy in the presence of lupine ones. Come to that, he felt uneasy in the presence of Lord Veterinary, but that was different. That was down to breeding, and ordinary fear, of course. Whereas he had known once since their childhood in the Shades. The boy had shown promise even then. He was never a gang leader. Hadn't got the strength of stamina for that. And after all, what was the point in being the gang leader? Behind every gang leader were a couple of lieutenants bucking for promotion. Being a gang leader is not a job with long-term prospects. But in every gang, there's a pale youth who's allowed to stay because he's the one who comes up with all the clever ideas. Usually to do with old women and unlocked shops. This was Wance's natural place in the order of things. Rah, rah, rah. Vimes had been one of the middle rankers, the falsetto equivalent of a yes man. He remembered Vance as a skinny little kid, always tagging along behind in hand-me-down pants with the kind of old skipping run he'd invented to keep up with the bigger boys, and forever coming up with fresh ideas to stop them idly ganging up on him, which was the usual recreation if nothing more interesting presented itself. It was superb training for the rigors of adulthood, and Vance became good at it. Yes, they'd both started in the gutter, but Vance had worked his way up, whereas, as he himself would be the first to admit, Vimes had merely worked his way along. Every time he seemed to be getting anywhere, he spoke his mind, or said the wrong thing, usually both at once. That was what made him uncomfortable around Vance. It was the ticking of the bright clockwork of ambition. Vimes had never mastered ambition. It was something that happened to other people. Ah, Vimes. Sir, said Vimes woodenly. He didn't try to salute in case he fell over. He wished he had time to drink dinner. Vance rummaged in the papers of his desk. Strange things afoot, Vimes. Serious complaints about you, I'm afraid, he said. Vance didn't wear glasses. If he had worn glasses, he'd have peered at Vimes over the top of them. Sir? One of your night watchmen seems he arrested the head of the Thieves Guild. Vimes swayed a little and tried hard to focus. He wasn't ready for this sort of thing. Sorry, sir, he said. It seems to have lost you there. I said, Vimes, that one of your men arrested the head of the Thieves Guild. One of my men? Yes. Vimes' scattered brain cells tried valiantly to regroup. A member of the watch, he said. Vance grinned mirthlessly. Tied him up and left him in front of the palace. There's a bit of a stink about it, I'm afraid. There was a note. Ah, here it is. This man is charged with conspiracy to commit crime under Section 14(3) of the General Felonies Act 1678 by me, Carrot Iron Founderson. Vimes squinted at him. 1488? I? Oh, it's I. Okay, it's not free. Sorry. Well, apparently, said Vance. What does that mean? I really haven't the faintest notion, said Vance dryly. And what about that name? Carrot? But we don't do things like that, said Vimes. You can't go around arresting the Thieves Guild. I mean, we'd be at it all day. But apparently this Carrot thinks otherwise. The captain shook his head and winced. Carrot? Doesn't ring a bell. The tone of blurred conviction was enough even for Vance, who was momentarily taken aback. He was quite... The secretary hesitated. Carrot, he said. I've heard that name before. Seen it written down. His face went blank. The volunteer, that was it. Remember me showing you? Vimes stared at him. Wasn't there a letter from, I don't know, some dwarf? All about serving the community and keeping the streets safe, that's right. Begging that his son would be found suitable for a humble position in the watch. The secretary was rummaging among his files. What he done? Said Vimes. Nothing. That was it. Not a blessed thing. Vimes's brow creased as his thoughts shaped themselves around a new concept. The volunteer, he said. Yes. He didn't have to join. He wanted to join. All you said it must be a joke. I said we ought to try and get more ethnic minorities into the watch, you remember? Vimes tried to. It wasn't easy. He was vaguely aware that he drank to forget. What made it rather pointless was that he couldn't remember what it was he was forgetting anymore. In the end, he just drank to forget about drinking. A trawl of the chaotic assortment of recollections that he didn't even try to dignify anymore by the name of memory produced no clue. "Do I?" he said helplessly. Vons folded his hands on the desk and leaned forward. "Now look, Captain," he said. "Lordship wants an explanation. I don't want to have to tell him the captain of the Night Watch hasn't the faintest idea what goes on amongst the men under, if I may use the term loosely, his command. That sort of thing only leads to trouble. Questions asked, that sort of thing. We don't want that, do we?" "Do we?" "No, sir," Vimes muttered. A vague recollection of someone earnestly talking to him in a bunch of grapes was bobbing guiltily at the back of his mind. Surely there hadn't been a dwarf, not unless the qualifications had been radically altered at any rate. "Of course we don't," said Vons, "for old time's sake," and so on. "So I'll think of something to tell him, and you, Captain, will make a point of finding out what's going on and putting a stop to it. Give this dwarf a short lesson on what it means to be a guard, all right?" "Haha," said Vimes dutifully. "I'm sorry," said Vons. "Oh, thought you made an ethnic joke there, sir." "Look, Vimes, I'm being very understanding in the circumstances. Now I want you to get out there and sort this out. Do you understand?" Vimes saluted. The black depression that always lurked ready to take advantage of his sobriety moved in on his tongue. "Right you are, Mr. Secretary," he said. "I'll see to it that he learns that arresting thieves is against the law." He wished he hadn't said that. If he didn't say things like that, he'd have been better off now. Captain of the Palace Guard, a big man. Giving him the watch had been the patrician's little joke. But Vons was already reading a new document on his desk. If he noticed the sarcasm, he didn't show it. "Very good," he said. "Dearest Mother," Carrot wrote, "it has been a much better day. I went into the Thieves' Guild and arrested the chief miscreant and dragged him to the patrician's palace. No more trouble from him, I fancy. And Mrs. Palm says I can stay in the attic, because it's always useful to have a man around the place. This was because in the night there were men the worse for drink making a fuss in one of the girls' rooms, and I had to speak to them, and they showed fight, and one of them tried to hurt me with his knee, but I had the protective, and Mrs. Palm says he has broken his patella, but I needn't pay for a new one. I do not understand some of the watch's duties. I have a partner. His name is Nobby. He says I'm too keen. He says I have got a lot to learn. I think this is true because I have only got up to page 326 in The Laws and Ordinances of the City of Ankh and Morpok. Love to all, your son, Carrot. P.S. Love to Minty." It wasn't just the loneliness. It was the back-to-front way of living. That was it, thought Vimes. The Night Watch got up when the rest of the world was going to bed, and went to bed when dawn drifted over the landscape. You spent your whole time in the damp, dark streets in a world of shadows. The Night Watch attracted the kind of people who, for one reason or another, were inclined to that kind of life. He reached the watch house. It was an ancient and surprisingly large building wedged between a tannery and a tailor who made suspicious leather goods. It must have been quite imposing once, but quite a lot of it was now uninhabitable and patrolled only by owls and rats. Over the door, a motto in the ancient tongue of the city was now almost eroded by time and grime and lichen, but could just be made out. Fabricati diem Punk, I think. It translated according to Sergeant Colin, who had served in foreign parts and considered himself an expert on languages, to S, to protect and to serve. Yes, being a guard must have meant something once. Sergeant Colin, he thought as he stumbled into the musty gloom. Now there was a man who liked the dark. Sergeant Colin owed 30 years of happy marriage to the fact that Mrs. Colin worked all day and Sergeant Colin worked all night. They communicated by means of notes. He got her tea ready before he left at night. She left his breakfast nice and hot in the oven in the morning. They had 3 grown-up children, all born, Vimes had assumed, as a result of extremely persuasive handwriting. And Corporal Nobbs, well, anyone like Nobby had unlimited reasons for not wishing to be seen by other people. You didn't have to think hard about that. The only reason you couldn't say that Nobby was close to the animal kingdom was that the animal kingdom would get up and walk away. And then, of course, there was himself. Just a skinny, unshaven collection of bad habits marinated in alcohol. And there was the night watch, just the 3 of them. Once there had been dozens, hundreds, and now just 3. Vimes fumbled his way up the stairs, groped his way into his office, slumped into the primeval leather chair, which is with its prolapsed stuffing, scrabbled at the bottom drawer, grabbed bottle, bit cork, tugged, spat out cork, drank, began his day. The world swam into focus. Life is just chemicals. A drop here, a drip there, everything's changed. A mere dribble of fermented juices and suddenly you're going to live another few hours. Once, in the days when this had been a respectable district, some hopeful owner of the tavern next door had paid a wizard a considerable sum of money for an illuminated sign, every letter a different color. Now it worked erratically and sometimes short-circuited in the damp. At the moment, the E was a garish pink and flashed on and off at random. Vimes had grown accustomed to it. It seemed like part of life. He stared at the flickering play of lights on the crumbling plaster for a while, and then raised one sandaled foot and thumped heavily on the floorboards twice. After a few minutes, a distant wheezing indicated that Sergeant Colin was climbing the stairs. Vimes counted silently. Colin always paused for 6 seconds at the top of the flight to get some of his breath back. On the 7th second, the door opened. The sergeant's face appeared around it like a harvest moon. You could describe Sergeant Colin like this. He was the sort of man who, if he took up a military career, would automatically gravitate to the post of sergeant. You couldn't imagine him ever being a corporal, or, for the matter, a captain. If he didn't take up a military career, then he looked cut out for something like, perhaps a sausage butcher. Some job where a big red face and a tendency to sweat even in frosty weather were practically part of the specifications. He saluted and, with considerable care, placed a scruffy piece of paper on Vimes's desk and smoothed it out. "Evening, Captain," he said. "Yesterday's incident reports and that. Also, you owe 4 pence to the tea club." "What's this about a dwarf, Sergeant?" said Vimes abruptly. Colin's brow wrinkled. "What dwarf?" "The one who just joined the watch. Name of..." Vimes hesitated. "A carrot or something." "Him?" Colin's mouth dropped open. "He's a dwarf? I always said you couldn't trust some little buggers. He fooled me all right, Captain. The little sut must have lied about his height." Colin was a sizist, at least when it came to people smaller than himself. "Do you know he arrested the president of the Thieves Guild this morning?" "What for?" "For being president of the Thieves Guild, it seems." The sergeant looked puzzled. "Where's the crime in that?" "I think perhaps I had better have a word with this carrot," said Vimes. "Didn't you see him, sir?" said Colin. "He said he reported to you, sir." I must have been busy at the time, not on my mind," said Vimes. Yes, sir," said Colin politely. Vimes had just enough self-respect left to look away and shuffle the strutter of paperwork on his desk. "We've got to get him off the streets as soon as possible," he muttered. Next thing you know, he'll be bringing in the chief of the Assassin's Guild for bloody well killing people. Where is he? I sent him out with Corporal Nobs, Captain. I said he'd show him the ropes, sort of thing. You sent a raw recruit out with Nobby, said Vimes wearily. Colin stuttered. Well, sir, experienced man, I thought Corporal Nobs could teach him a lot. Well, let's just hope that he's a slow learner, said Vimes, ramming his brown iron helmet on his head. Come on. When they stepped out of the watchhouse, there was a ladder against the tavern wall. A bulky man at the top of it swore under his breath as he wrestled with the illuminated sign. It's the E that doesn't work properly, Vimes called up. What? The E, and the T sizzles when it rains. It's about time it was fixed. Fixed? Yes, fixed. That's what I'm doing, all right? Fixing. The watchman splashed off through the puddles. Brother Watchtower shook his head slowly and turned his attention once again to his screwdriver. Men like Corporal Nobs can be found in every armed force. Although their grasp of the I'm scared of that word. I'm gonna take a second, I'm gonna sip. And then I'm gonna rethink the sentence. Men like Corporal Nobs can be found in every armed force. Although their grasp of the minutiae of the regulations is usually encyclopedic, they take good care never to be promoted beyond perhaps corporal. He tended to speak out of the corner of his mouth. He smoked incessantly, but the weird thing, Carrot noticed, was that any cigarette smoked by Nubby became a dog end almost instantly, but remained a dog end indefinitely or until lodged behind his ear, which was a sort of nicotine elephant's graveyard. On the rare occasion he took one out of his mouth, he held it cupped in his hand. He was a small, bandy-legged man with a certain resemblance to a chimpanzee who never got invited to tea parties. His age was indeterminate. Sorry for wonking a microphone. His age was indeterminate, but in cynicism and general world weariness, which is a sort of carbon dating of the personality, he was about 7,000 years old. A cashy number this route, he said as they strolled along a damp street in the merchant's quarter. He tried the door handle. It was locked. You stick with me, he added, and I'll see you're all right. Now you try the handles on the other side of the street. Ah, I understand, Corporal Nobs. We've got to see if anyone's left their store unlocked, said Carrot. Well, you catch on fast, son. I hope I can apprehend a miscreant in the act, said Carrot zealously. Yeah, said Nobby uncertainly. But if we find the door unlocked, I suppose we must summon the owner, Carrot went on. And one of us would have to stay to guard things, right? Yeah, Nobby brightened. I'll do that, he said. Don't you worry about it. Don't you worry about it. Then you could go and find the victim. Owner, I mean. He tried another doorknob. It turned under his grip. Back in the mountains, said Carrot, if a thief was caught, he was hung up by the... He paused, idly rattling a doorknob. Nobby froze. By the what? He said in horrified fascination. Can't remember now, said Carrot. My mother said it was too good for them anyway. Stealing is wrong. Nobby had survived any number of famous massacres by not being there. He let go of the doorknob and gave it a friendly pat. Got it, said Carrot. Nobby jumped. Got what? He shouted. I remember what they're hanging him up by, said Carrot. Oh, said Nobby weakly. Where? We hang them up by the town hall, said Carrot. Sometimes for days. They don't do it again, I can tell you. And beyond strong in the arm's your uncle. Nobby leaned his pike against the wall and fumbled a fag end from the recesses of his ear. One or two things, he decided, needed to be sorted out. Why did you have to become a guard, lad? He said. Everyone keeps asking me that, said Carrot. I didn't have to. I wanted to. I will make a man of me. Nobby never looked anyone directly in the eye. He stared at Carrot's right ear in amazement. You mean you ain't running away from anything? He said. What would I want to run away from anything for? Nobby floundered a bit. There's always something. Maybe you was wrongly accused of something. Like maybe, he grinned, maybe the stores was mysteriously short on certain items and you was unjustly blamed. Or certain items was found in your kit and you never knew how they got there. That sort of thing. You can tell old Nobby. Or, he nudged Carrot. Perhaps it was something else, eh? Cherchez la fin, eh? Got a girl into trouble? Carrot began and then remembered that, yes, one should tell the truth, even to odd people like Nobby, who didn't seem to know what it was. And the truth was that he was always getting Minty in trouble, although exactly how and why was a bit of a mystery. Just about every time he left after paying calls on her at the Rock Smasher cave, he could hear father and mother shouting at her. They were always very polite to him, but somehow merely being seen with him was enough to get Minty into trouble. Yes, he said. Often the case, said Nobby wisely. All the time, said Carrot. Well, just about every night, really. Blimey, said Nobby, impressed. He looked down at the protective. Is that why they make you wear that, then? What do you mean? Well, don't worry about it, said Nobby. Everyone's got their little secrets. Or big secrets, as it might be. Even the captain. He's only with us because he was brung low by a woman. That's what the sergeant says. Brung low. Oh, goodness, said Carrot. It sounded painful. But I reckon it's 'cause he speaks his mind. Spoke it once too often to the patrician, I heard. Said the Thieves Guild was nothing but a pack of thieves or something. That's why he's with us? No, really. He looked speculatively at the pavement and then said, So where you staying, lad? There's a lady called Mrs. Palm, Carrot began. Nobby choked on some smoke that went the wrong way. In the shades? He wheezed. You're staying there? Yes. Every night? Well, every day, really, yes. And you've come here to have a man made of you? Yes. I don't think I should like to live where you come from, said Nobby. Look, said Carrot, thoroughly lost. I came because Mr. Vaneshi said it was the finest job in the world, upholding the law and everything. That's right, isn't it? Well, said Nobby. As to that, I mean, upholding the law. I mean, once, yes, before we had all the guilds and stuff. The law sort of thing ain't really, I mean, these days everything's more, I don't know. Basically, you just ring your bell and keep your head down. Nobby sighed. Then he grunted, snatched his hourglass from his belt, and peered in at the rapidly draining sand grains. He put it back, pulled the leather muffler off his bell clapper, and shook it once or twice, not very loudly. 12 o'clock, he muttered, and all's well. That's it, is it? Said Carrot as the tiny echoes died away. Well, more or less. Nobby took a quick drag on his dog end. Just that? No moonlight chases around rooftops? No swinging on chandeliers? Nothing like that? Said Carrot. I shouldn't think so, said Nobby fervently. I never done anything like that. No one ever said anything to me about that. He snatched a puff on the cigarette. A man could catch his death of cold chasing around on rooftops. I reckon I'll stick to the bell if it's all the same to you. Can I ever go? Said Carrot. Nobby was feeling unbalanced. It can be the only reason why he made the mistake of wordlessly handing Carrot the bell. Carrot examined it for a few seconds, then he waved it vigorously over his head. 12 o'clock, he bellowed, and all's well. The echoes bounced back and forth across the street and finally were overwhelmed by a horrible, thick silence. Several dogs barked somewhere in the night. A baby started crying. Shh, hissed Nobby. Well, it's all well, isn't it? Said Carrot. Well, it won't be if you keep on ringing that bloody bell. Give it here. I don't understand, said Carrot. Look, I've got this book Mr. Vaneshi gave me. He fumbled for the laws and ordinances. Nobby glanced at them and shrugged. Well, never heard of them, he said. Now just shut up your row. You don't want to go making a din like that. You could attract all sorts. Come on this way. He grabbed Carrot's arm and bustled him along the streets. What sorts? Protested Carrot as he was pushed determinedly forward. Well, bad sorts, muttered Nobby. But we're the watch. Well, damn right. And we don't want to go tangling with people like that. Remember what happened to Gaskin? Well, I don't remember what happened to Gaskin, said Carrot, totally bewildered. Who's Gaskin? Well, before your time, mumbled Nobby. He deflated a bit. Poor bugger. Could have happened to any of us. He looked up and glared at Carrot. Now, stop all this, you hear? It's getting on my nerves. Moonlight bloody chases my bum. He stalked along the street. Nobby's normal method of locomotion was a kind of siddle, and the combination of stalking and siddling at the same time created a strange effect, like a crab limping. But, said Carrot, in this book it says, I don't want to know from no book, growled Nobby. Carrot looked utterly crestfallen. But it's the law, he began. He was nearly terminally interrupted by an axe that wired out of a low doorway beside him and bounced off the opposite wall. It was followed by sounds of splintering timber and breaking glass. Hey, Nobby, said Carrot urgently. There's a fight going on. Nobby glanced at the doorway. Of course there is, he said. It's a dwarf bar. Worst kind. You keep out of there, kid. Them little buggers like to trip you up and then kick 12 kinds of shit out of you. You come along on Nobby and he'll... He grabbed Carrot's tree-trunk arm. It was like trying to tow a building. Carrot had gone pale. Dwarfs drinking and fighting, he said. Well, you bet, said Nobby, all the time. And they use the kind of language I won't even use to my own dear mother. You don't want to mix in with them. They're a poisonous bunch of don't go in there. No one knows why dwarfs who, at home in the mountains, led quiet, orderly lives, forget it all when they move to the big city. Something comes over even the most blameless iron ore miner and prompts him to wear chainmail all the time, carry an axe, change his name to something like Grab-Throat Shin Kicker, and drink himself into surely oblivion. It's probably because they do live such quiet and orderly lives back at home. After all, probably the first thing a young dwarf wants to do when he hits the big city after 70 years of working for his father at the bottom of a pit, is have a big drink and then hit someone. The fight was one of those enjoyable dwarvish fights with about 100 participants and 150 alliances. The screams, oaths, and the ringing of axes on iron helmets mingled with the sound of a drunken group by the fireplace, who, in another dwarvish custom, were singing about gold. Nobby bumped into the back of Carrot, who was watching the scene with horror. Look, it's like this every night in here, said Nobby. Don't interfere. That's what the sergeant says. It's their ethnic folkways or something. You don't go messing with ethnic folkways. But, Carrot stuttered. These are my people. Sort of. It's shameful acting like this. What must everyone think? Well, we think they're mean little buggers, said Nobby. Now come on. But Carrot had waded into the scuffling mass. He cupped his hands around his mouth and bellowed something in a language Nobby didn't understand. Practically any language, including his native one, would have fitted that description, but in this case it was Dwarvish. I get to read Dwarvish. I forgot about this. Well? Gruduksk, Axt esim ki Bork zim. Literally translated, good day, good day. What is all of this that is going on here in this place? The fighting stopped. 100 bearded faces glared up at Carrot's stooped figure, their annoyance mingled with surprise. A battered tankard bounced off his breastplate. Carrot reached down and picked up a struggling figure without apparent effort. Juk, je trut estuza, hut detsk trutzhuk, husut kruk, dip tus gekir kme act tuts bit kit tukt kerkt ad tuk. Listen, sunshine. Literally, the stare of the great hot eye in the sky whose fiery gaze penetrates the mouth of the cavern. I don't want to have to give anyone a smacking, so if you play Padutz with me, I'll play Padutz with you, okay? Padutz, a popular dwarvish game which consists of standing a few feet apart and throwing large rocks at one another's head. Literally, all correctly beamed and prodded. No dwarf had ever heard so many old tongue words from the mouth of anyone over 4 feet height. They were astonished. Carrot lowered the offending dwarf to the floor. There were tears in his eyes. You're dwarfs, he said. Dwarfs shouldn't be acting like this. Look at you, aren't you ashamed? 100 bone-hard jaws dropped. I mean, look at you, Carrot shook his head. Can you imagine what your poor, white-bearded old mother, slaving away back in her little hole, wondering how her son is getting on tonight, can you imagine what she'd think if she saw you now? Your own dear mothers, who first showed you how to use a pickaxe. Nobby, standing by the doorway in terror and amazement, was aware of a growing chorus of nose-blowing and muffled sobs as Carrot went on. She's probably thinking, I expect he's having a quiet game of dominoes or something. A nearby dwarf wearing a helmet encrusted with 6-inch spikes started to cry gently into his beer. And I bet it's a long time since any of you wrote her a letter too, and you promised to write every week. Nobby absent-mindedly took out a grubby handkerchief and passed it to a dwarf who was leaning against the wall, shaking with grief. Now then, said Carrot kindly, I don't want to be hard on anyone, but I shall be coming past here every night from now on, and I shall expect to see proper standards of dwarven behavior. I know what it's like when you're far from home, but there's no excuse for this sort of thing. He touched his helmet. Gruk tuk. Literally, evening all. Or, felicitations to all present at the closing of the day. He gave them all a bright smile and half-walked, half-crouched out of the bar. As he emerged into the street, Nobby tapped him on the arm. Don't you ever do anything like that to me again, he fumed. You're on the city watch. Don't give me any more of this law business. But it's important, said Carrot seriously, trotting after Nobby as he sidled into a narrower street. Not as important as staying in one piece, said Nobby. Dwarf boss, if you've got any sense, my lad, you'll come in here and shut up. Carrot stared up at the building they had reached. It was set back a little from the mud of the street. The sound of considerable drinking were coming from inside. A battered sign hung over the door. It showed a drum. A tavern, is it? Said Carrot thoughtfully. Open at this hour? Well, don't see why not, said Nobby, pushing open the door. Damn useful idea. The mended drum. And more drinking? Carrot thumbed hastily through the book. Well, I hope so, said Nobby. He nodded to the troll which was employed by the drum as a splatter. Like a bouncer, but trolls use more force. Evening, detritus. Just showing the new lad the ropes. The troll grunted and waved a crusted arm. The inside of the mended drum is now legendary as the most famous, disreputable tavern on the Discworld. And such a feature of the city that, after recent unavoidable redecorations, the new owner spent days recreating the original patina of dirt, soot, and less identifiable substances on the walls and imported a ton of pre-rotted rushes for the floor. The drinkers were the usual bunch of heroes, cutthroats, mercenaries, desperados and villains, and only microscopic analysis could have told which was which. Thick coils of smoke hung in the air, perhaps to avoid touching the walls. The conversation dipped fractionally as the two guards wandered in, and then rose to its former level. A couple of cronies waved at Nobby. He realized that Carrot was busy. "What you doing?" he said. "And no talking about mothers, right?" I'm taking notes," said Carrot grimly. "I've got a notebook." "But that's the ticket," said Nobby. "You'll like this place. I comes here every night for my supper." How do you spell contravention?" said Carrot, turning over a page. "I don't," said Nobby, pushing through the crowds. A rare impulse to generosity lodged in his mind. "What do you want to drink?" "I don't think that would be very appropriate," said Carrot. "Anyway, strong drink is a mocha?" He was aware of a penetrating stare at the back of his neck and turned and looked into the big, bland and gentle face of an orangutan. It was seated at a bar with a pint mug and a bowl of peanuts in front of it. It tilted its glass amicably towards Carrot and then drank deeply and noisily, by apparently forming its lower lip into a sort of prehensile funnel and making a noise like a canal being drained. Carrot nudged Nobby. "There's a monk," he began. "Don't say it," said Nobby urgently. "Don't say the word. It's the librarian, works up at the university. Always comes down here for a nightcap of an evening." "And people don't object?" "Why should they?" said Nobby. He always stands around. He always stands his round, just like everyone else." Carrot turned and looked at the ape again. A number of questions pressed for attention, such as, where does it keep its money? The librarian caught his gaze, misinterpreted it, and gently pushed a bowl of peanuts towards him. Carrot pulled himself to his full impressive height and consulted his notebook. The afternoon spent reading the laws and ordinances had been well spent. "Who is the owner, proprietor, lessee, or landlord of the premises?" he said to Nobby. "What's that?" said the small guard. "Landlord. Well, I suppose Charlie here is in charge for the night. Why?" He indicated a large, heavy-set man whose face was a net of scars. Its owner paused in the act of spreading the dirt more evenly around some glasses by means of a damp cloth and gave Carrot a conspiratorial wink. "Charlie, this is Carrot," said Nobby. "He's stopping along the Rosy Palms." "What? Every night?" said Charlie. Carrot cleared his throat. "If you are in charge," he intoned, "then it is my duty to inform you that you are under arrest." "Arrest of what, friend?" said Charlie, still polishing. "Under arrest," said Carrot, "with a view to the presentation of charges to wit 1I, that on or about 18th Grune at a place called the Mended Drum, Filigree Street, you did A. serve or B. did cause to serve alcoholic beverages after the hours of 12 midnight, contrary to the provisions of the Public Ale Houses Opening Act of 1678, and 1II on or about 18th Grune at the place called the Mended Drum, Filigree Street, you did serve or did cause to serve alcoholic beverages in containers other than of a size and capacity laid down by aforesaid Act, and 2I, that on or about 18th Grune at a place called the Mended Drum, Filigree Street, you did allow customers to carry unsheathed edge weapons of a length greater than 7 inches, contrary to Section 3 of said Act, and 2II, that on or about 18th Grune at a place called the Mended Drum, Filigree Street, you did serve alcoholic beverages in premises apparently unlicensed for the sale and or consumption of said beverages, contrary to Section 3 of the aforesaid Act. There was a dead silence as Carrot turned over another page and went on. "It is also my duty to inform you that it is my intention to lay evidence before the justices with a view to the consideration of charges under the Public Foregatherings Gambling Act 1567, the Licensed Premises Hygiene Act of 1433, 1457, 1463, 1465, and 1470 through 1690, and also..." He glanced sideways at the librarian, who knew trouble when he heard it coming and was hurried trying to finish his drink. "The Domestic and Domesticated Animals Care and Protection Act, 1673. The silence that followed held a rare quality of breathless anticipation as the assembled company waited to see what would happen next. Charlie carefully put down the glass, whose smears had been buffed up to a brilliant shine, and looked down at Nobby. Nobby was endeavoring to pretend that he was totally alone and had no connection whatsoever with anyone who might be standing next to him and coincidentally wearing an identical uniform. "What's he mean, justices?" he said to Nobby. "There ain't no justices." Nobby gave a terrified shrug. "New, is he?" said Charlie. "Make it easy on yourself," said Carrot. "This is nothing personal, you understand," said Charlie to Nobby. "It's just a was name. Had a wizard in here the other night talking about it. Sort of bendy educational thing, you know." He appeared to think for a moment. "Learning curve, that was it. It's a learning curve. Detritus, get your big stony ass over here a moment." Generally, about this time in the minute drum, someone throws a glass. And in fact, this now happened. What a heavy chapter. How's everyone doing? I hope all that gibberish was at least kinda understandable. Our poor boy keeps arresting people for breaking the law. Our poor bitch. Hello! I'm getting petted in 3 different speeds. 2 different speeds. But 3 times. I don't have enough heads for this. It was a good time, noise. He is the definition of lawful good, yeah? Your lung capacity continues to amaze. I would like to prove that to you in a different way, but cough, cough. I never said that. This is not live and or recorded. This will be cut out of the YouTube video. Blush, blush. I am the beautiful middle ground of someone who has sang in 3 choirs but also has chronic throat issues. So I have a good capacity for air, but not the throat to support that. Squint, but it's the Discord emoji. Is the Discord emoji squint not here? Or which one do you mean? I should need a squint. Maybe I should talk to Shy about that. There's not even a Discord emoji for squinting. Ah, maybe there should be one. I'm really bad at pronouncing words today is the only problem. We have to live with that. Okay, big stretchy. And this is probably gonna be the last section for today. Yeah. Just because my throat is starting to give up. The last day of working at a job where I have to get up at 4 in the morning. And you cannot imagine how much I am looking forward to sleeping in after that. I will just sleep through the whole day. I've already decided I'm gonna flop down on the couch and just do nothing for a day. Okay. You deserve a break. You know, the work itself was so good. I wish I could continue doing it, but start at 6 and not have to argue with my bosses every month, basically. was probably better this way. Maybe I'll start with the actual post. Become a legit cool delivery boy. We stand our postal workers. Also, Ink, thanks for coming back. I hope you're having some nice food. Captain Vimes ran up Short Street, the longest in the city, which shows the famous Morpok subtle sense of humor in a nutshell, with Sergeant Colin stumbling along behind, protesting. Sorry, you're stuffing your face at amazing speeds. You're stuffing your face at amazing speeds. My throat is great. We are two peas in a pod. Captain Vimes ran up Short Street, the longest in the city, which shows the famous Morpok's subtle sense of humor in a nutshell, with Sergeant Colin stumbling along behind, protesting. Nobby was outside the drum, hopping from one foot to another. In times of danger, he had a way of propelling himself from place to place without apparently moving through the intervening space, which could put any ordinary matter transporter to shame. "He's fighting in there," he stuttered, grabbing the captain's arm. "All by himself," said the captain. "No, with everyone," shouted Nobby, hopping from one foot to another. "Oh," Conscience said, "there's 3 of you. He's wearing the same uniform. He's one of your men. Remember poor old Gaskin." Another part of his brain, the hated, despicable part which had nevertheless enabled him to survive in the guard these past 10 years, said, "It's rude to butt in. We'll wait until he's finished and then ask him if he wants any assistance. Besides, it isn't a watch policy to interfere in fight. It's a lot simpler to go in afterwards and arrest anyone recumbent." There was a crash as a nearby window burst outward and deposited a stunned fighter on the opposite side of the street. "I think," said the captain carefully, "that we'd better take prompt action." "Well, that's right," said Sergeant Colin. "A man could get hurt standing here." They sidled cautiously a little way down the street, where the sound of splintering wood and breaking glass wasn't so overpowering, and carefully avoided one another's eyes. There was the occasional scream from within the tavern, and every now and again a mysterious ringing noise, as though someone was hitting a gong with their knee. They stood in a little pool of embarrassed silence. "You had your holidays this year, Sergeant?" said Captain Vimes eventually, rocking back and forth on his heels. "Yes, sir. Sent the wife to Curran last month, sir, to see her aunt." "Very nice at this time of year, I'm told." "Yes, sir." "All the geraniums and whatnot?" A figure tumbled out of an upper window and crumpled on the cobbles. That's where they've got the floral sundials, isn't it?" said the captain desperately. "Yes, sir. Very nice, sir. All done with little flowers, sir." There was a sound like something hitting something else repeatedly with something heavy and wooden. Vimes winced. "I don't think he'd have been happy in the watch, sir," said the sergeant in a kindly voice. The door of the men-at-drum had been torn off during riots so often that specially tempered hinges had recently been installed. And the fact that the next tremendous crash tore the whole door and door frame out of the wall only showed that quite a lot of money had been wasted. A figure in the midst of the wreckage tried to raise itself on its elbows, groaned, and slumped back. "Well, it would seem that it's all," the captain began, and Nobby said, "Oh, it's the bloody troll." "What?" said Vimes. It's the troll. The one they have on the door." They advanced with extreme caution. It was, indeed, detritus, the splatter. The splatter. Sorry. He wasn't a splatter. It is very difficult to hurt a creature that is, to all intents and purposes, a mobile stone. Someone seemed to have managed it, though. The fallen figure was groaning like a couple of bricks being crushed together. "Well, that's a turn up for the books," said the sergeant vaguely. All three of them turned and peered at the brightly lit rectangle where the doorway had been. Things had definitely quieted down a bit in there. "You don't think," said the sergeant, "that he's winning in there, do you?" The captain thrust out his jaw. "We owe it to a colleague and fellow officer," he said, "to find out." There was a whimper from behind them. They turned and saw Nobby hopping on one leg and clutching a foot. "What's up with you, man?" said Vimes. Nobby made an agonized noise. Sergeant Colin began to understand. Although cautious obsequiousness was the general tenor of the watch behavior, there wasn't one member of the entire squad who hadn't at some time been at the wrong end of detritus's fist. Nobody had merely tried to play catch-up in the very best traditions of policemen everywhere. "He went and kicked him in a rock, sir," he said. "Disgraceful," said the captain vaguely. He hesitated. "Do trolls have rocks?" he said. "Take it from me, sir." "Good grief," Vimes said. "Dame Nature moves in strange ways, doesn't she?" "Right you are, sir," said the sergeant obediently. "And now," said the captain, drawing his sword, "forward." "Yes, sir." "That means you too, sergeant," the captain added. "Yes, sir." It was possibly the most circumspect advance in the history of military maneuvers, right down at the bottom end of the scale that things like the charge of the Light Brigade are at the top of. They peered cautiously around the ravaged doorway. There were a number of people sprawled across the tables, or what remained of the tables. Those who were still conscious looked unhappy about it. Carrot stood in the middle of the floor. His rusty chainmail was torn, his helmet was missing. He was swaying a little from side to side, and one eye was already starting to swell. But he recognized the captain, dropped the feebly protesting customer he was holding, and threw a salute. "Back to report 31 offenses of making an affray, sir, and 56 cases of riotous behavior, 41 offenses of obstructing an officer of the watch in the execution of his duty, 13 offenses of assault with a deadly weapon, 6 cases of malicious lingering, and Corporal Nobby hasn't even shown me the rope yet." He fell backwards, breaking a table. Captain Vimes coughed. He wasn't at all sure what you were supposed to do next. As far as he knew, the watch had never been in this position before. "I think you should get him a drink, Sergeant," he said. "Yes, sir." "And get me one, too." "Yes, sir." "Have one yourself, why don't you?" "Yes, sir." "And you, Corporal, will you please... What are you doing?" "Searching the body, sir," said Nobby, quickly straightening up. "For incriminating evidence and that." "In their money pouches?" Nobby thrust his hands behind his back. "You never know, sir," he said. The sergeant had located a miraculously unbroken bottle of spirits in the wreckage and forced a lot of its contents between Carrot's lips. "What are we going to do with all this lot, Captain?" he said over his shoulder. "I haven't the faintest idea," said Vimes, sitting down. The watch jail was just about big enough for 6 very small people, which were usually the only sort to be put in it. Whereas these... He looked around him desperately. There was Nork the Impaler, laying under a table and making bubbling noises. There was Big Henry. There was Grabber Simmons, one of the most feared barroom fighters in this city. All in all, there were a lot of people it wouldn't pay to be near when they woke up. "We could cut their throats, sir," said Nobby, veteran of a score of residual battlefields. He had found an unconscious fighter who was about the right size and was speculatively removing his boots, which looked quite new and about the right size. "That would be entirely wrong," said Vimes. He wasn't sure how you actually went about cutting a throat. It had never hitherto been an option. No, he said. I think perhaps we'll let them off with a caution. There was a groan from under the bench. Besides, he went on quickly, we should get our fallen comrade to a place of safety as soon as possible. A good point, said the sergeant. He took a swig of the spirits for the sake of his nerves. The two of them managed to sling Carrot between them and guide his wobbling legs up the steps. Vimes, collapsing under the weight, looked around for Nobby. Corporal Nobbs, he rasped, why are you kicking people when they're down? It's the safest way, sir, said Nobby. Nobby had long ago been told about fighting fair and not striking a fallen opponent, and had given some creative thought to how these rules applied to someone 4 feet tall with the muscle tone of an elastic band. Well, stop it. I want you to caution the felons, said the captain. How, sir? Well, you... Captain Vimes stopped. He was blowed if he knew. He'd never done it. But just do it, he snapped. Surely I don't have to tell you everything. Nobby was left alone at the top of the stairs. A general muttering and groaning from the floor indicated that people were waking up. Nobby thought quickly. He shook an admonitory cheese straw of a finger. Let that be a lesson to you, he said. Don't do it again. And ran for it. Up the darkness of the rafters, the librarian scratched himself reflectively. Life was certainly full of surprises. He was going to watch developments with interest. He shelled a thoughtful peanut with his feet and swung away into the darkness. And have one yourself, why don't you? Why are you quoting that? It is funny, but... Did I read that wrong? What happened? Yeah, we have to stop soon. My tea is almost empty. I just like that line. It is good. It is really good. All the lines are good. It's just a good book. I don't know why this specific writing style resonates with me a lot. I hope I get better at bringing it across, because I feel like there's some stuff where I'm like, oh no, I don't know how to bring that across. Oh, you've been cute. Thank you. Thank you very much. I love Corporal Nobby hasn't even shown me one rope yet. It's so silly. Dwarfs don't know what fucking idioms are. So if he has to show him the ropes, he better be fucking seeing some ropes. Well, back to the secret society of people who want to summon dragons. The Supreme Grandmaster raised his hands. Are the thuribles of destiny ritually chastised, that evil and loose thinking may be banished from this sanctified circle? Yep. The Supreme Grandmaster lowered his hands. Yep, he said. Yep, said Brother Dunnican happily. Done it myself. You are supposed to say, yea, oh Supreme One, said the Supreme Grandmaster. Honestly, I've told you enough times. If you're not all going to enter into the spirit of the thing. Yes, you listen to what the Supreme Grandmaster tells you, said Brother Watchtower, glaring at the errant brother. I spend hours chastising them thuribles, muttered Brother Dunnican. Carry on, O Supreme Grandmaster, said Brother Watchtower. Very well then, said the Grandmaster. Tonight we'll try another experimental summoning. I trust you have obtained suitable raw materials, brothers. Scrubbed in scrubbed, not that you get any things. All sorted out, Supreme Grandmaster, said Brother Watchtower. It was, the Grandmaster conceded, a slightly better collection. The brothers had certainly been busy. Pride of place was given to an illuminated tavern sign whose removal, the Grandmaster thought, should have merited some sort of civic aware. At the moment, the E was a ghastly pink and flashed on and off at random.
I got that,
said Brother Watchtower proudly.
They thought I was mending it or something, but I took my screwdrivers and I...
Yes, well done, said the Supreme Grandmaster. Shows initiative.
Thank you, Supreme Grandmaster, beamed Brother Watchtower.
Knuckle rubbed raw, all red and cracked, never even got my $3 back. I've no one as much as says.
And now, said the Supreme Grandmaster, taking up the book, we will begin to commence. Shut up, Brother Dunnikin.
Every town in the multiverse has a part that is something like Ankh-Morpork's Shades. It's usually the oldest part. Its lanes faithfully following the original track of medieval cows going down to the river, and they have names like the Shambles, the Rookery, Snick's Alley. Most of Ankh-Morpork is like that in any case. But the Shades was even more so, a sort of black hole of bred in the brickwork lawlessness. Put it like this, even the criminals were afraid to walk the streets. The watch didn't set foot in it. They were accidentally setting foot in it now. Not very reliably. It had been a trying night and they had been steadying their nerves. They were now so steady that all four were relying on the other three to keep them upright and steer. Captain Vimes passed the bottle back to the sergeant.
Shame on...
He thought for a bit.
You, he said, drunk in front of a super officer.
The sergeant tried to speak, but could only come out with a series of S's.
Put yourself on a charge,
he said Captain Vimes, rebounding off a wall. He glared at the brickwork.
Your wall assaulted me, he declared. Ha! Think you're tough, eh? Well, I'm an officer of the law. I have you know, and we don't take any.
He blinked slowly, once or twice.
I say we don't take any off, Sergeant, he said. The chances, sir, said Colin. No, the other stuff. Never mind. Anyway, we don't take any of it from anyone.
Vague visions were trotting through his mind of a room full of criminal types, people that had jeered at him, people whose very existence has offended and taunted him for years, lying around and groaning. He was a little unclear how it had happened, but some almost forgotten part of him, some much younger Vimes with a bright shining breastplate and big hopes, a Vimes he thought the alcohol had long ago drowned, was suddenly restless.
Shall I tell you something, Sergeant? He said.
Sir? The four of them bounced gently off another wall and began another slow, crabwise waltz across the alley.
This city, Sergeant. This city is a woman, Sergeant. So it is a woman, Sergeant. Asian, rattle beauty, Sergeant. But if you fall in love with her, then she kiss your teeth.
It's a woman, said Colin. He screwed up his sweating face with the efforts of thought.
It's 8 miles wide, sir. It's got a river in it. Lots of houses and stuff, sir, he reasoned.
Vimes waggled an unsteady finger at him.
Never said I was a small woman, did I? Be fair.
He waved the bottle. Another random thought exploded in the front of his mind.
We show him anyway,
he said excitedly, as the four of them began an oblique shuffle back to the opposite wall.
Showed them, didn't we? Taught them forget they won't lesson in a hurry, eh?
That's right, said the sergeant, but not very enthusiastically. he was still wondering about his superior officer's sex life. But Vimes was in the kind of mood that didn't need encouragement. Captain Vimes knows how to appreciate an 8-mile wide woman. If only you knew. This is beautiful. Ah! He shouted at a dark alleyway. Don't like it, eh? Taste of your own medicine thingy. Well, now you can boodle in the trams. He threw the empty bottle into the air. 2 o'clock, he yelled, and all's well. Which was astonishing news to the various shadowy figures who had been silently shadowing the 4 of them for some time. Only sheer puzzlement had prevented them making their attention sharp and plain. These people are clearly guards, they were thinking. They've got the right helmets and everything, and yet here they are in the shades. So they were being watched, with the fascination that a pack of wolves might focus on a handful of sheep who had not only trotted into the clearing, but were making playful butts and baaing noises. The outcome was, of course, going to be mutton, but in the meantime, inquisitiveness gave a stray of execution. Carrot raised his muzzy head. "Where are we?" he groaned. "On our way home," said the sergeant. He looked up at the pitted, worm-eaten, and knife-scored sign above them. "We're just going down. He squinted. "Sweetheart Lane." "The Sweetheart Lane's not our way home," slurred Nobby. "We won't want to go to Sweetheart Lane, it's in the shades. Or catch us going down Sweetheart Lane." There was a crowded moment in which realization did the icy work of a good night's sleep and several pints of black coffee. The 3 of them, by unspoken agreement, clustered up towards Carrot. "What are we gonna do, Captain?" said Colin. We could call for help," said the Captain uncertainly. "What, where?" "You've got a point." "I reckon we must have turned left out of Silver Street instead of right," gaffed Nobby. "Well, that's one mistake we won't make again in a hurry," said the Captain. Then he wished he hadn't. They could hear footsteps. Somewhere off to their left, there was a snicker. I gotta be really careful, because for some reason, Terry Pratchett, in the old versions of the books, I don't know if that's a British thing, writing snicker with a double G. But I'm scared of that word. I'm scared. "We must form a square," said the Captain. They all tried to form a point. "Hey, what's that?" said Sergeant Colin. "What?" "There was again sort of a levery sound." Captain Vimes tried not to think about hoods and garroting. There were, he knew, many gods. There was a god for every trade. There was a beggar's god, a horse goddess, a thief's god, probably even an assassin's god. He wondered whether there was somewhere in that vast pantheon a god who would look kindly on hard-pressed and fairly innocent law enforcement officers who were quite definitely about to die. There probably wasn't, he thought bitterly. Something like that wasn't stylish enough for the gods. Catch any god worrying about any poor sod trying to do his best for a handful of dollars a month. Not them. Gods went overboard for smart bastards whose idea of a day's work was prison the ruby eye of the earwig king out of his socket, not for some unimaginative sap who just pounded the pavement every night. It's a British English word. Yeah, probably. That is probably correct. It still scares me. I don't like saying it, so I won't. I will give it a hard CK. More sort of slippery, said the sergeant, who liked to get things right. And then there was a sound. Perhaps a volcanic sound, or the sound of a boiling geyser, but at any rate, a long, dry roar of a sound, like the bellows in the forges of the Titans. But it was not as bad as the light, which was blue-white and the sort of light to print the pattern of your eyeball's blood vessels onto the back of the inside of your skull. They both went on for hundreds of years and then instantly stopped. The dark aftermath was filmed with purple images, and once the ears regained the ability to hear, a faint, clinkery sound. The guards remained perfectly still for some time. "Well, well," said the captain weakly. After a further pause, he said, very clearly, every consonant slotting perfectly into place. "Sergeant, take some men and investigate that, will you?" "Investigate what, sir?" said Colin, but it had already dawned on the captain that if the sergeant took some men, it would leave him, Captain Vimes, all alone. "No, I've got a better idea. We'll all go," he said firmly. They all went. Now that their eyes were used to the darkness, they could see an indistinct red glow ahead of them. It turned out to be a wall, cooling rapidly. Bits of calcined brickwork were falling off as they contracted, making little pinging noises. That wasn't the worst bit. The worst bit was what was on the wall. They stared at it. They stared at it for a long time. It was only an hour or two till dawn, and no one even suggested trying to find their way back in the dark. They waited by the wall. At least it was warm. They tried not to look at it. Eventually Colin stretched uneasily and said, "Chin up, Captain. Could have been worse." Vimes finished the bottle. It didn't have any effect. There were some types of sobriety that you just couldn't budge. "Yes," he said. "It could have been us."